very much for coming. It's lovely. It's lovely on a rainy day to be able to come in. And I wonder, Nicole, if you could just start by giving us a few sentences to set a context for the short reading.
Yes, of course. Hi, thank you for coming. Nothing Special is set partly in present day and partly in Andy Warhol's factory. And it's about two girls, and mainly one girl, May, as she types up a novel written by Andy Warhol. And this is a scene from the factory. I answered the phone only once, an act of utmost courage. Hello, I said, and the voice on the other end said, I want to speak to Andy. Get me Andy. I approached him. All our interactions still consisted of me seeing him across the room, painting or talking, or on the phone, curling the cord around his fingers in the dark, or standing still in contemplation. Then I was in front of him, and he was like an apparition. He barely responded when I told him there was a call for him. He rested his hand on his cheek to obscure his pimples, a trick I knew well. He gave a nod, an assertion that he had seen me before. He didn't ask where I came from or what had brought me here. And why would he? I was just another young person in a room full of young people. He had absolutely nothing to say to me, but I could still see him assessing, deciding. Harmless. Bad skin, bad hair, hiding even when he was in front of you. The effort he put in to make it seem like he had no power at all. He took the call, his arms folded. Even when he was in a room full of people, he was apart from them, totally separate, though he was connected to everything. I appraised him like Shelley would, with the same misplaced confidence, refusing to be intimidated. Without even noticing, I'd started to think like her. I'd always been inclined to follow. One morning I came in and my typewriter was gone. I touched the cold surface of my desk where it once sat. At first I felt only slight annoyance if someone had rearranged items in my bedroom. Then a rising panic. I was being thrown out, useless, like the bags of grey refuse that were removed weekly. I'd been caught out. I thought about other things I could do. I could make coffee, the family trade. My mind seized on that coffee pot as my saviour. As I stood there looking bewildered, Shelley placed a box on my desk. She swung her legs over towards me, a cigarette extending from her hand. Do you want me to take dictation? I can't, I said. Someone has stolen my typewriter. Was it you? Was it you? Was it you? Shelley mimicked me. Look inside. I was already reaching into the box. I held a cassette up under the light, as if expecting it to reveal something. I turned it over a couple of times in my hand. I'm always surprised these things are made out of plastic, Shelley said. It seems like it should be something more durable.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Oh, I'll give it back. It's your book.
I wonder if we could start by you explaining to us very succinctly who Andy Warhol was.
For the people that don't know, Andy Warhol was an artist in 1960s New York who ran a sort of scene, or was in charge of a sort of scene called the Factory. Is that succinct?
No, I need to go a bit further.
Okay, and he was famous mainly for his paintings or the pop art movement. And then he also made a lot of films. He's responsible for Interview magazine, continued making work until the 70s, through the 70s into the 80s, when he died.
And he's famous for saying that everybody... Finish it?
Everyone will be famous for 15 minutes.
Yeah, all of us, one by one, I think we're going to be famous for 15 minutes. But he did dominate the imagination of the art world in New York and elsewhere for all these years.
Yeah.
And the Factory was a place where people could come, strangely, get in or not, become famous for 15 minutes or more, hang around, get damaged, manage to survive, and nobody understood quite what the magic was, but there was magic.
I think there was magic, and also it was a kind of time, you know, I spent a bit of time researching this book, and people were always like, oh, was it like were you jealous of them because, you know, like they had all this sort of glamour and things, and I was like, no, I wasn't really jealous of that, but I was jealous of the fact that they got to spend so much time with their friends and like hang around. I don't have time to hang around, Colm. Like I have to pay my rent and things like that. So that way it was a great time of like creative freedom that we don't really get to do anymore.
There was a lot of hanging around, including, I mean, the place was so open, especially when the next building they went to after your building, that it was open enough for someone just to come up on the elevator, I call it the elevator, come up on the lift, and literally shoot him. And that you know, the place was so open for anyone to come in and out of that place. And people were also in that world. Could you just take us through the life of one of them? a young woman called Edie. You know, people were damaged in this world.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting mix of, I think some of them were, like he gets a lot of kind of, people blame him for someone like Edie, but I think...
Could you tell us Edie? Yeah.
Edie was a girl from a wealthy family who kind of found Andy, and Andy found her, and they became like a sort of pairing, even to the point where they looked alike, and they were, you know, they were socialites, they went to everything, and Edie eventually kind of became more and more, got addicted to more and more drugs, and, you know, sadly passed away very young. I think she was under 25 when she died.
Yeah, could you talk us about the book that was written about her?
Oh, yes. Yes, there's a book about her called Edie, an American Girl, by Jean Stein. And I love this book. Have you read this book?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like an oral history. So it's from all different, and it was actually very important for this book, all kind of people that knew her, like talking about her life, what she was like. And you get to see, it's a really interesting biography because you get to see her from so many different perspectives. And there's been a lot of biographies of Warhol, but they're always kind of straightforward. But I like Edie because it reminds you that, you know, you're a different person to everyone you meet, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think somebody here could ask, well, what did Edie do? I mean, was she a writer? Was she a photographer? What was she? And the answer is, this is a very strange world where people could enter and become oddly famous because he, for example, there's a wonderful moment in your book where you describe the whole idea of what he did with the screen test, where he would bring people in and simply put a camera on them. And for some people, of course, they would absolutely thrive. They would come alive when that people moved in and out of the light of the screen, changing shapes. When they were illuminated underneath the flare, I could see many of them were ordinary, broken, yellowing teeth, irregular features, bulging eyes, but all of it was overshadowed by whatever confidence and sexuality they projected. So he had this, he had this idea that somehow if he just left the camera alone, something would emerge. Instead of editing or instead of changing or asking questions, indeed, just get a camera and leave it there. He did it on buildings as well. But part of his affect was to make things seem effortless and to see what would happen then.
Yeah, and you can still watch the screen test. The screen tests are still on YouTube, and you can watch Edie's and things, and they're quite exposing. When you leave the camera on someone for a long time, you could kind of see their character emerge, and I think that was kind of I think it was his gift, you know. I feel like spotting talent in other people is like an underrated talent. Like, I think, you know, like being able to see when someone has charisma or you know, screen presence or whatever, and he could do that.
I don't know if you do this, but I was writing a novel and I thought I need to read the most boring book during the novel so that I would not...
It wasn't this book.
I would not... you know where I'm going with this. And I read, and I'm not even going to comment on what you just said. And your book is coming out in July in America. Can I suggest you don't try self-deprecation?
Oh, I know.
It's fine here. We understand it in Dublin. It's part of the deal. Don't do that again, ever. But the most boring book I've ever read in my life were Andy Warhol's diaries. And they just go on and on. Obviously, they cover every day. He's very interested in the amount of money he spends down to the smallest cent. He goes to parties. He loves listing who he's rude to or who he ignored at a party. Went to such and such a party, ignored so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so. The going to the party was part of the evening, but it wasn't about as much as enjoying yourself as sort of performing or refusing to perform or just standing there. His mother looms large in all of this. And his Catholicism, the strangest thing of all, was this man who sort of, you know, was at the very center of the New York art world and reinventing things, including the image, was a fervent and slightly paranoid Catholic. You know, I mean, I'm not going to go into detail about that, but, you know, he lived quietly. He went home to his mammy when night fell. Honestly, his day was spent just you know, described. He loved things where nothing happened, or not even when something was about to happen, but a taxi downtown, the amount it cost, how late it was to get there. You know, honestly, it was a sort of wonderful book because by the time I was finished, I thought, no matter what I write, no matter what I do, it won't be as boring as Andy. So it was as though he didn't over-dramatize. That in the prints he made, in the photographs he took, in the films he made, there was a whole sense of standing back and refusing to shape or go into, I suppose, into drama.
Yeah. No, I think, and I've read the diaries. They're quite fascinating and yeah, very boring. But like such an insight into a person. I think the point that you made about him being Catholic is like the most interesting thing. And once you understand that he's Catholic, you understand everything. And actually, when I started writing this book, I made a little, because obviously I'm Irish and I don't clearly have much in common with Warhol, but I made a little list of things that we both had in common. And I was like, oh, we both like shopping, we both like collecting things. And I was raised Catholic and things. And I felt that when it's a much more, it's not an Irish book, but I think it's quite a Catholic book, this book.
When we used to come up to Dublin on the train from Enniscorthy, you would get off at Connolly. It was called Amiens Street, and you would walk along Tóibín Street, and the only thing I wanted in life, besides the fact that Woolworths had a self-service, you wouldn't have to wait for the food, was an escalator. I just couldn't believe that the steps would melt into each other. You could go up, and you couldn't go down on the same, you could find another one. Now, talk me through escalators.
Yes. Okay. There's like at the start of the book, May is kind of separated from her friend group, and she just hangs around, and she's looking for something to do. So she travels the escalators up and down in a kind of in Bloomingdale's or one of them.
Macy's.
Macy's. She's not Bloomingdale's yet. I was thinking about that Warhol idea of things being just very kind of boring. Boredom did inform some of this book, and things moving quite slowly, and then obviously just machines, you know, like the typewriter is obviously the huge machine in the book, and then something like an escalator when she's just like on it, and you know, you get to the top and you can see everything, and a kind of sense of control and things. But yeah, I actually really like escalators, and as research, I went up and down a couple.
And then you write this. I love this. Several weeks after I first started, and a while after I came to understand a large part of the reason I was doing it, I met a man travelling down in the opposite direction. This is escalators. There was nothing troubling, nothing perverse about his appearance, but as he passed, he pressed his hand over mine. I think that's a wonderful image of the escalator. You're going there, he put his hand over yours. Oh my God, a firm grasp. It was affectionate, even though the contact was only brief. His hand over mine under the hot department store lights our fingers meeting on the escalator rail. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was just a brilliant image, which sort of sets her up in a way that she's ready for anything, but very innocent as well.
Yeah. I think she's waiting for, you know, sort of, that moment, or I think, like, you know, you are like 16 or 17, like waiting for someone to tell you you're special or that you're, you know, unique in any kind of way. You know,
certainly the next time I go on an escalator, I'll think about nothing else, really.
We'll all be doing it.
Look, you know, we all know, I mean, everyone in this room knows that the hardest thing to do ever for all of us would be to write about sex. Like, we just can't write about sex. It's over, you know, and there's a prize even called the Bad Sex Award, and we all live in fear of getting that prize.
It is, it's very terrifying.
But I think there's great stuff here, really, you know, with this man. Well, I don't want to read but I love, when I was naked, he rubbed my small pudgy stomach in circular motions as if I was a sick animal. That's pretty good. His face was ecstatic, and I thought about how twisted and evil his features must have been when he screamed at chairs. But he was anyway, it goes on. But I think that writing is brisk, clear, original, and, you know, free of any nonsense about sex. That, in other words, she's quite puzzled by him. Mm-hmm. She's quite excited, but it's not as though she's enjoying herself.
Yeah. I feel like she's waiting to have experience something, whether it's good or bad. That's what she wants at this age. And then I think there's a sort of betrayal. She gets up in the morning and he's gone, and she talks to his mother. And I think that sort of sets up the novel in the way that no one is 100% trustworthy, or no one is who you think they're going to be. Yeah,
I mean, she, you know, his mother, obviously, Warhol is going to have a mother too, so this idea is going to form part of a sort of pattern. I couldn't shake the idea, he invited me to sit on a formal two-seater, which appeared new to me. I couldn't shake the idea of him and his mother moving a worn, older couch out of the apartment. Her bossing him, telling him to turn this way and that, ways that were impossible, berating his lack of strength. His mother was likely a shrew. The scenario struck me as a horribly intimate scene between mother, son, and couch. I sat perfectly still. That's lovely. I sat perfectly still. Watch that sentence. He held a single finger up to his lips and pointed at a door to indicate his mother was sleeping. Then he went into the kitchen to make coffee. And I mean, I think the point of this also is he's not going to loom large in the novel.
No.
That this novel it doesn't depend on, you meet him early in the novel and right through the novel he comes in various ways and the relationship changes. In other words, it's Warholian in the sense that Andy Warhol would not be interested in setting up a novel in which what happens now will have consequences later. It's merely what happens now, and you write it as a clear scene, and you move on to another scene.
Yeah, it's funny with the sections where they're typing up the novel. I was thinking of Warhol's ideas, maybe too much of it being like just slightly boring, you know, just like so you can kind of like sit there and enjoy that to get to the more exciting kind of parts.
I mean, typing itself. It's almost like sewing, or that in other words, a lot of people, certainly in my family, the older members who were all women, they prided themselves on their typing, and typing was in a way out of other work. And it was, people could do a certain number of words per minute and never make a mistake. And it was, I mean, it sounds like backbreaking work, but it wasn't at the time that I'm talking about of my mother and her sisters. It was considered an almost glamorous job, being an actual shorthand typist.
And then her and May, her and Shelley are having this kind of competition, you know, like May is I think faster, but Shelley's more precise, and that kind of, you know, who's the better typist. But it was seen as transformative sort of work for women in the 60s, you know.
So the problem is that they're typing for Andy Warhol and they're working from tapes. Now the problem is for you, the tapes are actually boring. I mean there's, and if you could just give us an account of what actually was on those tapes.
This was a problem, but this did arise. So it's the tapes are collected into a novel called A Novel, and it's quite a tricky book. It was supposed to be recorded over a period of 24 hours. That was like Warhol's intention, but then kind of Aladdin dropped out of the tapes, and then things took longer. But they're extremely hard to read, and as you can see in the book, they're extremely hard to type up because things move so fast. People are also like out of their minds and stuff on them, you know.
It's random.
It's totally random, yeah.
Their voices never matched what they were saying, which I think is a great thing. Their voices never matched what they were saying. Their emotions were all wrong. They were sick, broke, depressed, but always laughing, always amused, always energetic. The disconnect was enormous, and I couldn't understand it. The gap between how badly they felt and their energy and commitment to keeping going. Like at the party, I was waiting for a mist to clear. So in other words, she's young, she's innocent, she's in the city. And she puts on these. I mean, and she has the tapes, and she's listening to the strangest conversations, which she has to not make sense of, but actually put words onto.
And then also she's doing that, and also she's developing these kind of attachments to these people she's hearing all the time, because you know she can hear them in the conversations they're having, their secrets and what they're saying to each other. But then she goes to a party, and like they ignore her, they don't know she exists. And I kind of thought that was like an interesting idea, that kind of tension between, you know, you can know everything. It's sort of like, you know, they call them parasocial relationships now, between how we feel about celebrities and stuff. You know
what are they called?
Parasocial relationships.
Oh my God, I knew it'd be something new.
Every week.
Really?
Yeah, really. So like if you go on Twitter or whatever, and someone's always tweeting about like Beyonce or Taylor Swift is a massive one, and things, that the idea you can have this like full investment in someone's life, but they'll never know who you are. You're just constantly watching them.
Sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah. No.
Do you have I mean, what are your sources for May?
Yeah, for May.
Yeah.
It's funny because I felt like, obviously I started writing stories, and then I thought writing stories was like writing a novel, but it's not. It's actually very different, which I continue to find out by error. So it took me a long time to find May's voice, and I wrote several chapters. Oh God, several chapters that weren't included. Oh, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Included in the book, and then, yeah, I wanted to write a 16, 17-year-old girl, and people keep asking me if I found writing 1960s New York hard, but I actually found writing a teenage girl way harder, like to get that kind of voice right, you know, because they're so self-absorbed, and I hope I'm not that self-absorbed, you know? So that took a little while. That was quite tricky. But I was thinking about that age. I think 17 is like such a difficult age. I think you're always looking for something outside yourself.
You mean that she's knowing and innocent.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
therefore she's to watch every moment because she's to make sense of the world, but she's also desperately concerned about what impressions she makes.
Yeah. And she's constantly kind of, and I think that, you know, there's moments in the book where she does stuff where she probably shouldn't, or she doesn't intervene when she should, and she isn't always a good friend and things. And like, I think that is very typical of that age. And I knew I really wanted to write a character that, you know, is trying to figure themselves out.
Was there anything helpful? Was Clarice Lispector or Rachel Kushner or anyone like that?
I've read lots of Rachel Kushner. I haven't read any Clarice Lispector,
right.
Although I enjoyed a book I was thinking of, and she was here last week actually. It was Mary Gaitskill's Veronica.
Right. Could you talk about that?
Yes. So Mary Gaitskill's an American writer, and she's written some incredible short stories, but she's also written this novel called Veronica. It's about a girl who was a model, and she meets this kind of older woman who's a secretary as well. She gets a temp job, and it's her relationship with this woman. And a lot of it is told through memory, which is like nothing special is told through memory. I think Mary Gaitskill writes memory really well. So I was thinking of that.
I think it seems to me you made a big decision about New York.
Yeah.
That instead of making it into this flashy place where she's awestruck by the size of it, and you know that she's too interested in other things and she just doesn't really see it.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. That was the way I wanted to. I was very conscious writing this book of the things I didn't want to do, more conscious than maybe the things I wanted to do. I didn't want it to be like, you know, we're all familiar with like when Andy Warhol like comes into a scene in a film and he's like, you know, giving them drugs or whatever, giving them psychedelics, and he's just like a nothing. He's not like a person, like he's like an idea and things. I wanted it to feel real and grubby rather than, I don't know, the New York of our imaginations that we have from like 70s films.
Yeah, but I mean, you don't do Fifth Avenue, you don't do Greenwich Village, you don't do Brooklyn Bridge.
No.
You know, I mean, all those things seem to me to be palpably absent from the book because it's just not what she's thinking about. This is her. I blinked and was reminded that we were on the street, which of course she's indoors most of the time typing. The idea that the city was still here was preposterous. It's like a John Banville idea. People walking briskly, people sitting in the back of cabs, scared of their attention to each other, measuring out the distance between them, people making genuine and unforgivable mistakes on every street corner. What brought you here, I asked. I couldn't use my abilities where I'm from. Typing? And so that is really her going out into the street where really it's the joke she can make in a way about street corners and people in cabs, but it's not a sweep. It's not a young person coming to the city, finding Warhol, going to all the parties, having a whale of a time, sleeping with everybody, and then getting disappointed in the end.
Yeah.
You're just not doing. You must have decided early on
that I wasn't going to do that.
You know, in the stinging,
like, your novel sounds really good.
In the stinging fly officers, you must say, I'm not doing a New York novel for you. Thank you.
I did decide that quite early, and once I made that decision, I felt like it was easier. It's really hard to write something like The Factory or New York. It's really hard to write New York because we all have this idea of New York that is so, you know, there from TV and films and things. And I wanted it to look at it how she looks at it, which is, you know, she grew up there. And I just didn't, I wanted it to be just about her experience, you know. It wouldn't feel truthful to me if she came in and Warhol was like, you know, you're the most attractive, you're the best, you know, you need to be in all the films and you need to get up there, and everyone's dancing around or whatever and stuff like that. That didn't, even from what I read about The Factory, which to me, you know, was more of a place of work. Like Warhol went there to work every single, like it was a working kind of environment, and like I wanted it, and I wanted the book to be in some ways about disappointment and failure.
Does this have anything in common with the way certain historians are trying to work with people at the edge of the picture? Instead of the 1916 leaders, you take somebody who was in the GPO briefly that day to deliver something and then went away. And you're trying to trace who that person might have been with using whatever documents, like such as the census forms or even the pension files, to see if you could just, you know, write a picture of someone who's slightly outside history, rather than political leaders. You know.
Exactly, and I really wanted it to be, I think people were surprised that it was so about May and so little about Warhol, but to me the book was about May. It was about the experience of what it would be like to listen to these people but never get close enough, you know.
Do you have a thing where, I mean, there are a few times in the book, a good few times, where I was reading a passage and thinking, she's having a really good day. I don't know what, you know, like often it could be about, you know, a certain amount of coffee, not too much, a certain phone call not made, emails not listened, you know, sometimes you just have a good day. And there are a few times just, you know, this is, she's talking about parties. You had a good time or you didn't, which is sort of, now I discovered an array of vast complications, a way to dispassionately evaluate a party's worth. The basic topography, the banal surface, the hard, dark centre. Who was fun, who was fun, who was fun. They talked about parties as if they were sweets they were trying to suck dry. I tried not to look at them, just as I'd been instructed. And I felt with, particularly this page here, where you're on a sweep, there's something going on. Could you tell us the trick? Could you tell us how this happened?
Yeah. I love the long paragraph.
It's long.
Yeah. So my editors are always like, please put in a paragraph break. But I love a good long descriptive paragraph. That's the kind of writing I gravitate towards. And I like it when it has like a lot of momentum kind of in it. Like, and I love describing stuff like parties and things like that. So
you have to bring Warhol. I mean, Warhol does have to appear. I mean, I think it's really wise and really clever to have him. He's the one at the edge. He's the one that we don't get, you know, we don't see his consciousness or what he says. So he has to appear. Here he is. I never saw him come in, but I felt the atmosphere change when he did. I felt it brighten as if suddenly everybody knew exactly where to direct the beam of their attention-seeking. His presence demanded a response, although he didn't do or say much. When he walked across the floorboards, people were quiet, and he had explained in a bored way who he was. But I'd already seen the pictures. He worked further down the room, and no noise, no disturbance seemed to irritate him. His concentration was vast and untouchable. He appeared several times in my dreams, where he was much friendlier. He smiled or patted the top of my head, looked at me with adoration. I was never even introduced to him, but I knew his soft voice, his quick, soundless steps. Whenever he spoke to someone, they stood up as if they were more alive, more human in that moment. And there's a few things I want to point out about this. First of all, I'm not getting an Irish sound in it at all. I'm not finding, you know, people talk about Hiberno English. I don't know what it is, but it's not here. But I'm finding also an American tone in the book from American literature. From how do you describe a party going on in America? Well, you know, there's someone called Scott Fitzgerald who did so. But if you look at the sentence, his concentration was vast and untouchable. And it is that sort of sense of Warhol as being, what was he doing? In his diaries, he seems to be thinking about nothing. He's really good at that. But the aura he had, where people were always watching him, and he seemed to make a virtue out of that idea that he wasn't bothered. So his concentration was vast and untouchable. I just think that some of that sentence making seems to me to have its origins in American writing of the 20s. As much as it does, I mean, much more than it does any Irish source or any, you know, source at this side of the Atlantic. Yes,
I would agree. I think I read a lot of American writers. An American writer I was also thinking of particularly when I was writing this is Alfred Hayes. Do you know Alfred Hayes?
No, I do not. Tell us about him.
Okay. He's a writer from the 1950s. He wrote these very short novels. I feel like I talk about him all the time.
And you haven't made this up.
He's a real person. Okay. He wrote a book called My Face for the World to See, about a screenwriter who meets an aspiring actress. And he wrote another book actually set in New York called In Love. And it's that kind of, those kind of short kind of sentences that is sort of like, I was trying to do something, I don't know if I succeeded with May, you know, where she's sort of a tricky kind of character, where she's, you know, you don't know whether to trust her. And as time goes on, you're like, 10 pages in, you're like, she's a standard 17-year-old girl. 20 pages in, you're like, like, you know, she has that kind of darkness to her, I think. And I found, once I got the kind of sentences right, like sharp sentences, that it became clearer to me who she was. That
whole idea of at the party she's not performing, she's watching. But you have to be careful, I think, don't you, that she doesn't watch too much. She doesn't get it sometimes. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
That she's not in the middle of this group.
Yeah, she's not in the middle. Although she's making attempts, I think, more than Shelley towards the end to become part of something. But I think she, you know, the fact that they're listening to these people all the time, they're so overawed by them when they meet them, that there's no way in, you know. And I feel like that will be sort of true. Like you could convince yourself that you're 17, you go to a factory party, whatever, and you'd be welcomed in. But I think you would be hanging around the like kind of fringes of power, you know, like being like, there's Edie, there's Andy, you know.
Yeah. I wonder also, you know, your first book of stories, the stories are mainly set in Ireland, and they're mainly set in provincial Ireland.
Yeah.
And I think I know the feeling. I wonder if you had it, where I wrote a novel called The Blackwater Lightship, and it had 6 Irish people over 6 days locked in a house, and they couldn't stop in recrimination, making tea, and, you know, invoking the name of the Lord. And I thought when it was over, and it was raining, and when it was over, I thought, I'll never, ever write that again. I don't want any more Irish people. I don't want anyone saying sick-hearted, you know. I don't want any of that. I want something much more glamorous and much more cosmopolitan. You know, and when I wrote that, of course, I felt awful and guilty. But I wonder if after the book of Irish stories that you really did want to go somewhere. You know, that you weren't going to write, for example, about a young Irish girl setting out in the world.
I could do that, and I think I will still. But I feel when I wrote the stories, it's kind of funny because the stories were all first-person female set, and they were all, you know, young Irish women, and people kept asking me about them like they were autobiographical, even though they're like extremely absurd. And that was quite funny, even though, and no one's asked me if this is sort of autobiographical, even though I feel like there's a lot of me kind of in it. But yeah, I did think I wanted to try something different, but then, you know, when I read back over I read back over it just before it came out, and I read over the stories too because I knew I was going to be talking about them and things, and I felt, you know, there's so many things in common with both. The only thing that is setting, the only thing is different is the setting. You know, they're both about performance, kind of people in the shadow of like more famous people. You know, you just can't get away from yourself. Even when you try.
I think there was, if I was trying to find, say, I'm going to give up this Irish thing in a second, but if I was trying to find an Irish, you know, where is the Irish woman in this book? Yeah. There's a moment where one of them eats a burger, which I think any American just say, yeah, well, he ate a burger. What do you think he did? He ate a burger. And then if you're Irish, you think, actually, there's something obscene about eating a burger. And Shelley would have been like, so I ordered her a burger. Now, you've got to say, so if you're an American, you just say, I ordered her a burger, and she ate the burger. But if you're Irish, you write, I ordered her a burger, a hunk of red meat. She almost had to unhook her jaw to eat. And you know, if you like someone just watching an American eating a burger. But it's also that idea that you start working more and more, I think, in the book goes on with details like that, where you defamiliarize, you find something that's sort of normal, and you make it strange. Yeah. Her eyes were full of expectation, the meat hanging from her mouth. I mean, give us a break. You know, like that's not an American. That's you. Yes,
that's me. Yes, me commenting on you, eating a burger. But I feel that's something I try and do, or like that's what I don't know. In writing that I enjoy does that, makes something that's quite normal just like a little bit strange, like a little bit off. And the stories definitely is common in the stories as well.
I mean, did you feel that the story, that you had to be careful with the idea, you know, she types their words. Their words seem inconsequential. They seem to be speaking without any shape. So she's putting, obviously, by typing it, she's making it real. And that she comes to feel in her innocence and her youth that somehow or other it's her book because she has been the one. And there's a wonderful moment where she starts to think she's going to shape it more by making little mistakes, by putting in little aspects of her own self in misspellings, but that all the time actually she's going to be cast aside, that she's not going to be the author of the book.
That was the original idea. So before it even was about Warhol, or before I even kind of thought about Warhol, I read about this book I read about a novel in Olivia Laing's A Lonely City. And I thought that idea was really interesting. The idea that you could work on something and sort of become the author of it. And then, you know, it would go out into the world and it would just have Warhol's name on it, you know, and it was it would be taken away from you. And I can feel her attachment, I can understand her attachment to it. But, you know, she's never the writer.
I thought you were very careful and subtle with this, where you could make it into a big grievance book. Yeah. You know, that she was, no, but really, where she was the one who did all the work and they were just lying around. I mean, there are descriptions of all these people in a permanent state of, not just drugged, but just lying there. You know, and that she was the one. But you don't overdo that. I mean, you're very careful with that. Yeah. To make it not a book that I suppose, to make it an easy book for us to understand, to dramatise the idea that the person who did the typing was left out of the picture. But no, that she does feel it.
Yeah, she does feel it. And I feel like, she kind of says towards the end, she carries it, like, sort of with her as a secret, that the book is, she sees the book in shops and things, and she's like, that I was there, and I feel like that when I think of, like, any kind of historical event or whatever, it must have been difficult for, like, the people at the margins and things. I think there's a line, in the last chapter, she says, where, I can't remember, or I'm not allowed to remember, because, like, it just, all the stuff that came out about the factory, about it being so glamorous and this, that, or the other, would replace her memories,
Yeah.
So, or any kind of...
There's a story, I don't know what relationship it has to truth, but it's a beautiful story where no one in Irish dancing had ever done the standing in a row and going outwards towards the audience. They just hadn't done it before. So the question is, who thought of it?
Yeah.
And so one day they began to do it in rehearsal, which became river dance. But who thought of it? And there are loads of theories of someone who thought of it, and who wasn't Michael Flatley, And look, Michael Flatley may have thought of it years ago, but I love the idea that it was someone from the side just says, "Have you tried?" And so this is basically what you're talking about.
That's going to be my next one.
Who's Ondine?
Onadine? Yeah,
Oh, I'm calling him Ondine. Are you calling him Ondine?
Yeah, Ondine. Yeah.
Okay, I was calling him Ondine. I was being very Italian. He's called Ondine, is he?
Ondine, I think Ondine. Okay. He was one of Warhol's original guys, like a kind of actor. He was in the Chelsea Girls. He was like a really chatty guy, took a lot of amphetamines and things, and he was around in the 60s when, like, I feel like the people in the 60s, Edie, Online, like all those kind of people were different to the people that kind of came later, before it became a lot more businesslike and things like that. But he was around, and then he kicked drugs and then became a postman. And I think he died of AIDS in the 80s.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, your description of him here, he was O on my pages. O was for Ondine, also known as the Pope. And he was the main talker, words tumbling from him in a ceaseless monologue. If I hadn't seen him in the film, a Coke in hand, I'd have thought he was born on the tapes. No family, no history. He existed only to be recorded. After the second week of nothing but his voice in my ear, I knew how he finished his sentences. I knew his favourite curse words, the onsets of his mania when he was tightly wound in a fit of rage. I knew when he was especially high. I think I knew when he was lying. He knew a different New York than I did. He walked through a different city, a city I'd only heard of, seen headlines about, a city as sharp as a razor blade. And what I'm interested in here is that you're going into the technical thing, where she is really getting to know these people, courtesy of their voices. And that idea of, I think it's a big New York idea, no family, no history.
Yeah.
Don't bring your history here, and don't bring your family. You can reinvent, but don't reinvent with that sort of flashback of your earlier life in Minnesota. So that people were very surprised by Warhol's Catholicism, say, or his early life in Pittsburgh, or the arrival of his mother into the moment, and that he seemed to come with no family, no history. So you're working with a girl who does have a family, does have a history, coming into this world where everyone is, like, these people are disembodied for her until they're not, until she's able to imagine them. So you're able to work the idea of, how do you imagine a character? Well, one way is to start listening to them on tape like that. So she becomes a sort of artist. As she's working, typing.
And she convinces herself, I think, that she is an artist. There's that one line where she's talking to Mikey, and he says something. She's like, "I'm a writer," and he's like, "No, it's eavesdropping." It's that line between, is what she's doing really altering, or is it not? But I feel like that idea of coming to New York, and there was a couple of ideas of Warhol's that I was thinking of when I was writing the book, and that was one of them, like reinvention, transformation. You could, if you do this or that, you can become like an entirely new person, which is what I think the real lure of the factory was. It can take you and transform you into a celebrity, which was like an extremely new idea at the time.
Obviously, you couldn't leave the mother. I mean, it's too tempting, isn't it, not to have a scene where she goes shopping with the mother. I mean, you had to bring Mrs. Warhol. Could you talk to us about that?
I was wondering how to do this for a little while. I really love department stores as well, so there are like several department stores in the book, and she misbehaves, or she steps out of line, or I think she she doesn't follow the tapes exactly, and her punishment is to bring his mother shopping, which is this kind of awkward scene between these quite like two lonely, like May is at this point very lonely, like two lonely women.
This whole idea then of this being written in an aftermath. In other words, we know what happens next because it's an interesting thing in your acknowledgements. You acknowledge, say, Blake Gopnik's book, which, I mean, I don't want to say anything bad about him, but it's because it's very useful. But you know those big biographies where you think, oh no, he's only 19.
Did you reviewed it for the LRB?
Yes, and therefore, because I reviewed it, I had to read it.
That's the worst.
But I found the other book you mentioned, the Wayne Kostenbaum book.
Yes.
In other words, it's very hard to make Warhol's life interesting if you go at it chronologically. There are other lives that really lend themselves to just the next year. W.B. Yeats, for example, you can see, you need to know, he went to London, he met Maud Gonne. That was a significant moment. With Warhol, there's significant moments. Yes, he got shot, but that maybe wasn't that significant. So in other words, the story seems to go in a circular way or in a dotted line rather than in a chronological and then form. So the other book, the Wayne Kostenbaum book, is a book that just goes through his theories, goes through his films, and it takes him in an entirely different light in a way. And so that he lends himself to a novelist in that sense, in that you can come in from the side to the story.
Yeah, no, I really liked that Wayne Kostenbaum book because I think I agree. I don't think there is this like straight. He's such a tricky person. I don't think there is this straight arc where you can be like, well, this X happened and then he became this, like things always seem to be happening, or like his ideas seem to be coming like all the time, which I find really, really interesting.
Did you hang out in New York? I
lived in New York for a year.
Did you haunt the streets in order not to write those scenes?
Well, it was during COVID, largely, so I did not. I haunted Smithfield and Stony Better, which are very like 1960s New York. No, I lived in New York.
Can you just say that again, because just in case anyone missed it? You haunted what?
Smithfield and Stony Better.
So your New York is
just down the road.
Citric Road and Prussia Street.
But yeah, I lived in New York for a year, so I felt like I wasn't too kind of, and I read a lot. I watched a lot of the films. I watched a lot of films from 1960s and 1970s. And I did that kind of research. It's interesting what you're saying about the biographies, the Blake Gopnik one, which I read, and I felt the same way, like it is such a undertaking. But also some of the others, it's like I was saying about the Edie book, like you're getting, so many different people have so many different perspectives of him, and like even you can't trust any of them. So that was difficult. I read a couple, and everyone has their own kind of little agenda. Like somewhere along the lines, like someone includes a sentence where they thought of painting the soup cans, and it's like, well, you didn't all think of painting the soup cans. You didn't all suggest it him. So yeah, I found that quite.
He was also, I mean, I don't want to be rude about him, but he was also a kind of ninny, wasn't he? That he was afraid of his shadow.
Yeah.
And he would have had a lovely pandemic because he would have spent his time. People who everything that, when a package came in, washed it, he would have really been paranoid about catching COVID.
Yeah.
And he would have given him a big excuse to, not go anywhere, wear 10 masks or...
And he could have watched loads of TV because he loved watching TV. So
he loved just getting a TV screen and sitting vacantly in front of it.
Yeah, he would love COVID. It's a shame he missed it.
Well, thank you very much for this book.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed.
Thanks very much.